All right, welcome back to Binge Guide. You know the one, the next show. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Victoria, and today we are diving deep into, well, you could say a highly anticipated new release. I think that's fair to say. We know a lot of you out there have been really looking forward to this one, Wolf Hall, The Mirror and the Light.
Yeah. We've been doing our homework. We've gathered all the key information, everything we could find on this continuation, this next part of the acclaimed is the word, the acclaimed Wolf Hall saga.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who might not have been with us back then or just haven't had the chance yet, the original series was based on Hilary Mantel's novels.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone would argue with the assessment that they were brilliant novels,
Yeah.
Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies. And they really grip audiences with their portrayal of, well, everyone knows, right? Thomas Cromwell. And his rise, his ascent, you could say, through the court of King Henry VIII.
Oh, absolutely. And The Mirror and the Light, it's drawn from the final book in Mantel's trilogy, and it picks up the story immediately after the first series left off.
Right at the end there. So we're talking about May of 1536, and specifically, after the execution of Anne Boleyn. So, our mission in this deep dive is to give you the rundown of what the new series is going to cover, introduce you to the returning cast and who's new, and of course, when you can tune in, think of us as your guide. Think of this as your essential briefing, your must-read intel before you settle in, get comfortable and start watching.
Okay, so let's get right down to it. What's the narrative? What can we expect as viewers in terms of the narrative, the story of The Mirror and the Light? Well, as you said, we're thrown right into the events following Anne Boleyn's execution. So it's May 1536, and the story itself, it focuses mainly on the last 4 years of Thomas Cromwell's life. We're going to see him reach, well, the pinnacle of his journey, becoming, well, one source describes him as the most feared and influential figure of his time.
Wow. Now that's a bold statement. The most feared and influential, operating within, well, the shadow of Henry VIII. That's no mean feat. So what's the atmosphere like during this period? What's going on in England during this time?
Well, it's a time of great instability. Henry VIII's rule is facing a lot of pressure. On the home front, domestically, you've got religious rebellion, simmering beneath the surface, and then abroad, you've got, enemies plotting, the constant threat of invasion looming large. So Cromwell, he's not just dealing with, palace intrigue. He's operating within a nation that's under a great deal of stress, I guess you could say, a nation under strain.
So with all that going on, all this turmoil, this instability, Cromwell is trying to, well, maintain his very, very high position with a king who was, let's face it, a bit unpredictable.
Yeah. And I think the series is really going to dive into that internal pressure on Cromwell, that conflict between his desire to do right, his sense of justice, and then his instinct to survive under, well, one source put it this way, Henry's brutally mercurial gaze. So, it's this internal conflict that I think will be central, even more so than perhaps the external threats.
It sounds like he's walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
To get to such a high position based on your own merit, and then to have your entire fate hinge on the whims of the monarch. That must be, talk about pressure.
That's it, isn't it? The series, it makes us ask this question, whether it's intentional or not. How long can anyone at all truly remain in Henry's favor? And knowing what we know about history, that question, it carries a lot of weight. I think that's where a lot of the dramatic irony comes from.
Yeah, I see that. So I'm sure I'm not the only one who's just itching to watch this already. When can we actually start watching Wolf Hall, The Mirror and the Light? Give us the details.
Mark those calendars, because the premiere is on Masterpiece on PBS. It starts Sunday, March 23rd, going through to April 20th, 2025. Same time every week, Sunday nights at 9/8 Central. So 6 weeks, 6 episodes dedicated to this story.
6 episodes to cover all of that, to cover those final years. Is that enough? Based on the novel, on the depth of Mantel's book, does that feel like enough time to do it justice?
Well, based on the scope of Mantel's book, I think 6 episodes is a good length that's focused and impactful. The first series, it also had 6 episodes, and it covered a similar time span. So I think they can do it.
Okay, good. And for those of us who might miss an episode or just prefer to watch, on our own time, on our own schedule, what about streaming? What are the options there?
Yeah, well, you've got options, thankfully. You can stream the full episodes online, via the PBS app. And of course, for our PBS Passport members, those who support their local stations, you'll have access that way as well. So yeah, you can get immersed in Cromwell's world pretty easily these days.
That's great. That's great to hear. So we know when it airs,
Yeah.
how to watch it.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about who are the people who are going to be bringing these historical figures to life. The cast of the original Wolf Hall. I mean, they were really exceptional. So who's coming back for this final chapter? Who are we going to see again?
Well, we've got some really fantastic returns. I think fans will be pleased. Obviously, leading the way, we've got Mark Rylance as Thomas Cromwell. I mean, he was spectacular. I think that's the word most people use. Really lauded, won a BAFTA. So it's really exciting to see him back in the role.
Oh, absolutely. He really did capture Cromwell's his inner life. That shrewd intelligence. And what about King Henry himself, Damian Lewis?
Mm-hmm.
He was so compelling in the first series. Is he back?
He is back. You can breathe a sigh of relief. Damian Lewis will be returning as Henry VIII. We also have Jonathan Pryce returning as Cardinal Wolsey. Now, chronologically, Wolsey's not really in this part of the story, so we'll probably see him in flashbacks. His influence will be felt through those flashbacks, but not so much in the present of the narrative.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Wolsey was such an important part of Cromwell's early career. That mentorship, that was crucial. Any other familiar faces coming back?
Yeah, we've got a bunch, actually. We have Kate Phillips returning as Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, and, arguably his favorite. We've also got Lilith Lesser back as Princess Mary. She's always fascinating to watch. Her relationship with her father, very complex. Thomas Brodie Sangster is back as Rafe Sadler. Joss Porter as Richard Cromwell. James Larkin, he's back as Master Treasurer Fitzwilliam. Richard Delane as the Duke of Suffolk, Will Keane as Archbishop Cranmer, and Hannah Steele as Mary Shelton. So yeah, I mean, lots of continuity there, a lot of talent returning.
That's great news.
Yeah.
Really helps to maintain that immersive quality. And as viewers, we get to reconnect with these characters, these people we've already invested in. So that's the returning cast. What about new faces? Any new names we should be on the lookout for?
Oh yeah, definitely. Some really impressive new talent coming in. Alex Jennings, he's going to be playing Stephen Gardner. He became a very important figure in Cromwell's later years. And Harriet Walter, I mean, she's a phenomenal actress. She's going to be playing Lady Margaret Pole. We'll talk more about her a bit later. And then we have the always brilliant Timothy Spall joining as the Duke of Norfolk. So yeah, some really, really big names coming in, which suggests we're going to see, new layers of intrigue. Definitely.
Lady Margaret Pole, the Duke of Norfolk. Those are names that, they carry some historical weight, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It seems like there's going to be some dramatic developments, some shifting alliances to keep track of.
Definitely. Now, just to rewind a bit, remind us again, the first Wolf Hall series. What period did that cover? Just to set the stage for this continuation.
Right. So the first series, it came out back in 2015, and it really captivated audiences. I mean, it was based on those first two novels, Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies.
Yeah.
And it covered the years from roughly 1529 to 1536. The focus was mainly on Cromwell's rise, his rise to power in Henry VIII's court. And, he came from relative obscurity to a position of immense power. And ultimately, he played, a crucial role in the downfall of, everyone knows, Anne Boleyn. And that series itself, it got a lot of praise, didn't it?
It really did. A critical darling, yeah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Won a Peabody Award and a Golden Globe, Best Television Limited Series. It set a very high bar for historical drama, not just in the production value, but also in the the nuance of those character portrayals.
And so Peter Kosminski, who directed the first series, he's back for The Mirror and the Light.
Yes, he is, thankfully. He's back as both director and executive producer. So, that consistent vision is there, which I think is really important. And it's interesting, he's been involved with this project for quite a while now. Even while Hilary Mantel was writing the final book, he was in dialogue with her. So, that connection to the source material, that's invaluable. I mean, you can't really overstate that.
Wow, that says a lot. That says a lot about their dedication, their commitment to Mantel's vision. So what's Kosminski's perspective on this final chapter on Cromwell's story?
Well, he describes the mirror and the light as, essentially a portrait of what it is like to be at the mercy of a despot. And that really highlights, I think, just how precarious Cromwell's position is. Even though he's achieved all this power, all this influence, he's still at the mercy of Henry. And he also made an interesting point, that the original series showed Cromwell's rise, his ascent, based on his own merit, his own extraordinary abilities. But this sequel, this is going to be about his struggle to maintain that status, that hard-won position, with a king who's becoming increasingly paranoid.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? To see that shift, that change in the dynamic. You go from this exhilarating climb to this desperate fight to hold on, to survive.
Exactly. So let's talk about some of the key themes, the plot points that we can expect, based on the source material and just our understanding of history. Obviously, one of the biggest concerns for Henry, and therefore for Cromwell after the death of Jane Seymour, is an heir, a male heir, to secure the succession. And, one son, Edward, that might not be enough. Not in such an uncertain time.
No, of course not. The Tudor dynasty was fragile, and the succession was a constant source of anxiety.
And it's a big part of this narrative. It drives the story forward. And Cromwell's own position, his vulnerability, is tied to that. It's interesting because, one source put it this way. They said, despite all of his titles, all of his influence, he's still the blacksmith's son. His existence, his future, it all depends on Henry. On the next beat of Henry's heart, and your future on his smile or frown. I mean, talk about pressure.
Yeah, wow. That's a stark reminder, isn't it, of his origins, and that juxtaposition with his power, and the fact that at any moment he could fall out of favor. I mean, that's got to be psychologically incredibly taxing. Oh, no doubt about it. And then you've got the external threats as well. The Plantagenet line, specifically Reginald Pole, he poses a real challenge to Henry's authority, and from France he sends this manifesto to Henry. It's a bold move. He basically argues that Princess Mary, she's the legitimate heir, and he calls for a return to the Catholic Church. Reginald Pole. Now, there's a name that comes up again and again throughout Henry's reign. His Catholicism, his royal blood, it all made him, a real thorn in Henry's side, you could say. And his mother, Lady Margaret Pole, we mentioned her earlier. She's a new character in this series, right?
Yes, she is, and it'll be fascinating to watch Harriet Walter's portrayal of her. I mean, she had reconciled with the Tudor court before, but then her son, Reginald, he openly defies Henry, and the political landscape is shifting. There are people who want to go back to Catholicism, and she's caught in the middle of all of it.
So Cromwell's not just dealing with the king's volatile moods. He's also got to deal with these factions, with the possibility of real unrest, religious unrest. It's a lot.
It is. And one of his tasks, one of the things he's trying to do is to secure Princess Mary's allegiance, to your father and to the Church of England, which, given her strong Catholic beliefs and, how Henry has treated her in the past, that's not going to be easy.
Yeah, it sounds like he's constantly walking a tightrope, trying to keep everything balanced. All these personal pressures, all these political pressures. I mean, wow.
Absolutely. And it's not just the big picture stuff. He's also dealing with all the day-to-day, the rumors, the conspiracies at court, the constant threat of rebellion, and Henry's spending habits. I mean, Henry was known for being extravagant, and that could really hurt the realm's finances, their ability to respond to threats.
So it seems like there was never really a quiet moment, was there, in Henry's court? And of course, at the center of it all, you have this relationship between Henry and Cromwell.
Yeah, that's the heart of it all, isn't it? And it's so complex. It's evolving. Cromwell, he's got this uncanny ability to know what Henry wants, almost like he can read his mind. One source, they put it this way. They said Cromwell keeps Henry in the corner of his imagination, painted in bright colors and fitted with gilt shoes. He lives with it, but he doesn't talk to it. He is afraid it will answer back. So even when Henry's not physically there, he's always in Cromwell's mind.
That's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah.
Cromwell has all this authority, but it all comes from Henry.
Exactly. And then after the death of Jane Seymour, the question of Henry taking another wife, that becomes really important, both for a male heir and for political reasons. And historically, we know that, Christina of Denmark and Anne of Cleves, they were they were potential candidates.
Right. And I think our source material mentioned Hans Holbein the Younger, the painter.
Yeah, he was involved. With Christina of Denmark, Henry wanted to see what she looked like, so he had Holbein paint her portrait. There's this great quote. I mean, it might be apocryphal, but it's a good one. Christina was asked if she'd marry Henry, and she said, "If I had two heads, one should be at the King of England's disposal." I mean, that tells you something about Henry's reputation, doesn't it?
Oof, that's a pretty telling remark, yeah. Dark humor, but telling. And then, of course, you have Anne of Cleves.
Right. And for Cromwell, that alliance with a German Protestant state, that was strategically very important. It was meant to strengthen the Reformation in England. So Holbein, he painted Anne's portrait, and based on that and negotiations, the marriage was arranged. But as we know, it didn't last very long. It was a disaster.
And wasn't there a bit of a different perspective on the annulment, in our source material? Something about it not just being about Henry's his supposed dissatisfaction with Anne's appearance.
Yeah, the source suggested that, Henry, he wasn't exactly a young man anymore, and he didn't have the best track record with wives, so he might not have been that appealing to Anne either. And then there's the story of their first meeting. Henry disguised himself, but Anne, she didn't recognize him, and apparently maybe even ignored him, which, for a king who's known for his vanity, that probably didn't go over very well.
Oof, yeah. A bruised ego, a bruised royal ego. I mean, that can have consequences, that's for sure.
Definitely. And Mantell's narrative suggests that, that awkwardness combined with, well, let's just say Henry wasn't exactly thrilled with the marriage, and he needed someone to blame for this failed alliance. And unfortunately for Cromwell, he was the one who championed the marriage.
So even though Cromwell helps to get the marriage annulled, to appease Henry, he still gets the blame. It's the danger of playing the game of power, I guess.
Yeah.
Especially in the Tudor court.
It is, and that leads us to Cromwell's downfall. He's arrested, or he's imprisoned in the Tower of London, and it's interesting. He's held in the same lodgings that Anne Boleyn was held in just a few years earlier.
Oh wow. Talk about coming full circle.
It's pretty chilling. And the title of the series, The Mirror and the Light, that comes from Cromwell's own description of Henry. He called him the mirror and the light of other kings. He's the ultimate example. But the whole motif of mirrors and light throughout Mantell's books, it suggests something deeper, Yeah. It's about power, perception, truth, and maybe even the deceptive nature of influence.
It's interesting too. Damian Lewis talked about the time jump in the story, and he mentioned that the 9-year age gap between the actors now compared to the first series, it kind of mirrors the aging of the characters.
Yeah.
And it reflects this sense of a deteriorating world, the waning of Cromwell's power. It's a small detail, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's subtle, but it's effective. And our source material also pointed out that the very last shots of the first Wolf Hall, they were setting us up for this. You see Henry, he's almost gleeful after Anne's execution. And then you see Cromwell, and there's this look in his eyes, this unease, maybe even a sense of foreboding.
Yeah, you can just sense that something's not right. Even though he's achieved this victory in a way.
Right. And then you have the presence of all the people who Cromwell, had a hand in destroying, including Wolsey, his mentor. I think that will continue to haunt him and maybe even influence his decisions, Even though we know how the story ends, Mantell, she's so good at creating suspense.
Mm-hmm.
You almost wonder if things might go differently this time.
Yeah, it's that what if factor, right, that she manages to create. So Kosminski has said that he's aiming for a well-researched, contemporary, quite political drama. And he also said that he wants it to have a documentary feel to it. So it sounds like it's going to be pretty immersive, pretty authentic.
Absolutely. And Hilary Mantel, she had this gift for portraying historical figures, not as, these distant figures in a history book, but as real people making choices, dealing with complex situations, and they don't know, that they're going to be in the history books. And that makes their struggles so much more relatable, so much more impactful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was something in our source material about expecting to see another execution and another royal wedding by the end of the series, which, given the history, given what we know, that's probably pretty accurate.
It is. And while we know, historically that Catherine Howard becomes Henry's fifth wife, I think that the focus of the series is really going to be on Cromwell's story. I mean, it would have been fascinating to see how Mantell would have portrayed Catherine Howard. Her story it's so tragic, and Anne of Cleves, even though she was rejected, she went on to live a pretty good life in England, independently and quite prosperous. So that's a testament to her resilience. I think a small victory in the midst of, well, the ruthlessness of the Tudor court.
So you've given us a lot to think about, a lot to look forward to. It sounds like a really gripping continuation of an already compelling story. And the cast, both the returning and the new, I mean, it's exceptional. So yeah, I think this is definitely one to add to the list, to make time for.
Absolutely. I mean, the intrigue, the characters, Mantell's brilliant writing as the foundation, it all comes together to create something really special. I think this is going to be captivating television, and we want to hear from you. What are you most interested in? What stands out to you about this period, about these characters? Let us know.
This final chapter, it makes you ask this question. In the game of power, is survival, true survival, even possible? Even for someone as skilled, as shrewd as Cromwell, it's something to think about as you prepare to watch Wolf Hall, The Mirror and the Light, which we believe is going to be the next must-see show on your list.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Wolf Hall, The Mirror and the Light, here on Binge Guide, the next show. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you'll join us next time as we take a look at another new release, something else we think is worth your time, something else that deserves a spot on your watch list. So until then, happy binging.